In 1833, Britain did something it would later hold up as proof of its moral leadership. It passed the Slavery Abolition Act, a law that helped end slavery across much of the British Empire. It sounds like a clean story, a just story, a story of conscience, finally defeating cruelty. But there was a dark and disturbing twist. When slavery was abolished, the people who got paid were not the enslaved. They were the slave owners. That single fact changes the entire story. Because once you know it, the Abolition Act stops looking like a simple triumph of humanity and starts looking like something much more unsettling. An empire trying to end one of its greatest crimes without truly punishing the people who had profited from it. To understand how shocking that was, we need to go back a little. Britain had already abolished the slave trade in 1807. But that did not abolish slavery itself. It only made it illegal for British ships to carry enslaved people in the trade. Across the British colonies, slavery continued. Men, women, and children were still bought, sold, worked, whipped, and treated as property. And property is the key word here. By the early 19th century, slavery was not some distant colonial detail. It was deeply entangled with British wealth. Sugar, tobacco, and cotton had helped enrich merchants, investors, and families across the empire. By the time abolition finally came, Britain was not simply confronting a moral evil. It was confronting an economic system that had made a great many people rich. That is why 1833 matters so much. Parliament passed legislation on 28 August 1833 that abolished slavery within the British Empire, emancipating more than 800,000 enslaved people. On paper, this looked like one of the great humanitarian victories in British history. But hidden inside that victory was a giant financial settlement. $20 million in compensation for slave owners for the loss of what the law still called their property. The Bank of England helped administer those payments. Think about the meaning of that. After centuries in which enslaved people had been forced to labor without wages, torn from their families, and brutalized, the British state decided that the people who deserved financial redress were the owners, not the enslaved mother separated from her child, not the man whipped on a plantation, not the woman worked under a tropical sun until her body broke down. The money went to the people who claimed they had lost an asset, and the formerly enslaved, they received nothing, absolutely nothing. Not land, not money, not restitution for stolen labor, not compensation for lives deformed by bondage. Freedom came, but without repair, and even that freedom was incomplete. The act came into effect on 1st August 1834. But for many formerly enslaved people, emancipation did not mean full liberty. Instead, a system called apprenticeship replaced slavery. Under this arrangement, many of the newly freed were still bound to work for their former masters. Slavery had been abolished in law, yet a form of coerced labor remained in practice. Full emancipation only arrived on 1st August 1838. So even Britain's celebrated moral breakthrough came with a delay clause. Freedom was staggered, compensation was immediate. That tells you a great deal about whose interests the empire was still protecting. And this was not just the work of a few idealists in Parliament. Pressure had been building for years from abolitionist societies. One of the most powerful voices was Mary Prince, a woman born into slavery in Bermuda. Her life story helped Britain confront the reality of slavery. There was also fear. In Jamaica, the Great Rebellion led by Sam Sharpe in 1831 involved around 20,000 enslaved people and became a major catalyst. The enslaved were not passively waiting for freedom. They were resisting. They were forcing the empire to reckon with its violence. And yet, when the final deal came, Britain shaped emancipation in a way that cushioned the blow for the powerful. Parliament still treated enslavers as people whose losses had to be respected. Hansard records that $20 million was paid to secure their cooperation. This is why the story still feels modern. It asks, when a great injustice ends, who pays the price of transition? The victims or the beneficiaries? In 1833, Britain answered that question in a way that still shocks. It chose to pay the beneficiaries. The compensation package was added to the national debt. That debt remained embedded in Britain's finances for generations. The last repayment tied to it was only completed in 2015. The financial burden was still being carried forward long after slavery ended. That is the real sting in this story. Britain did abolish slavery, That mattered enormously. More than 800,000 people moved out of legal bondage. But neither should the compromise be minimized. Emancipation was shaped to protect wealth as much as principle. It was also the moment Britain revealed how hard it was to give up slavery without still honoring the people who had profited from it. And that may be the most uncomfortable truth of all. When freedom finally came, the wrong people got paid. Like, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more.